The heart is the key to the world and to life. One lives in this helpless situation in order to love and to learn of one's dependency on others. Through imperfection, one becomes open to the influence of others, and this openness is just the point. In sickness, others can and should help us. So Christ, from this standpoint, is the key to the world. Welcome, everyone. I'm happy, especially tonight, to welcome actress and theater professional and Chekhov Acting Method master teacher, Lisa Dalton, to our meeting. Lisa was here previously when Fred, there he is sitting there, when Fred Dennehy gave a presentation on acting. And I have to say personally that I'm very happy that drama and theater are again becoming part of the conversation in this section. I think that's really, really a happy circumstance. I'm looking forward to how it develops from here. Now, you may know Lisa from her recent October 2021 presentation at the Front Range Anthroposophical Cafe, or in the many other places you might have met. But at the cafe, she gave a presentation on Michael Chekhov, which was an introduction. I'll let in Gail. Here comes Gail. On Michael Chekhov, an introduction to his life and his approach to acting. And right in the middle of that presentation for the cafe, Lisa shared a thought that I highlighted in our meeting announcement for tonight, and I want to highlight it again, so I'm going to read it. Here's the leading thought. When Michael Chekhov was considering becoming a Christian community priest, Dr. Steiner encouraged him to stay on the path of the actor. Lisa asks, is it possible that Dr. Steiner foresaw that Chekhov could bring a new impulse to spiritual science through his work, an impulse that might nurture anthroposophy? Now, Lisa's topic for tonight is titled An Actor's Search for Grace. Grace. Now, we can take that word in many ways, but if you have been following our section meetings, you'll recall that the word grace entered the conversation on, when was it, February 21st, thereabouts, when Marion gave us an introduction to Heinrich von Kleist's important essay titled On the Marionette Theater. And in that essay, just to review quickly before I let Lisa go here, Kleist uses the word grace in a very special way. So I'm going to close this introduction, since Lisa put the word grace in the title of her talk tonight, with that quote, a quote from that essay by Kleist, and then I'll turn it over to Lisa. She'll talk for about 30 minutes, and then we should have plenty of time for conversation and questions, and let the Spirit move us as it may. But here's this quote from Kleist's little essay. It's a short one. Now, my excellent friend, said the companion in the essay, to Kleist, presumably, you are in possession of all you need to follow my argument. We see that in the organic world, as thought grows dimmer and weaker, grace emerges more brilliantly and decisively. But just as a section drawn through two lines suddenly reappears on the other side after passing through infinity, or as the image in a concave mirror turns up again right in front of us after dwindling into the distance, so grace itself returns when knowledge has, as it were, gone through an infinity. Grace appears most purely in that human form, which either has no consciousness or an infinite consciousness, that is, in the puppet or in the God. Those are the words by Kleist. And now I'll hand the Zoom over to Lisa. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Welcome.
Thank you, Bruce, and thank you everyone for gracing us with your presence.
So
we look at grace and we think of how many different ways grace comes into our world. Before we eat, we think perhaps we should say grace, or we seek another person's grace. And we're always, asking for more and more grace. And it's an interesting thing, when I was born fourth of five children, twin brothers 13 months older than myself, I developed into a ambisinistrous dyslexic klutz.
That's what.
Okay.
Ambidextrous, who knows this word? So you think of ambidextrous, it means you're dexterous with both hands, and dexter for right, and of course sinister for left. So ambisinistrous means you're clumsy with both hands, or you have two left hands. Handed, but mostly clumsy with either, and my feet too. So I fell down quite a bit. I was not not highly accepting of physical limitations, and especially wasn't accepting of limitations put on girls that boys didn't have. And so I was highly competitive with those twin boys, the three of us 13 months apart. Basically, I just grew up as a third son. And however, this being left-handed, undiagnosed dyslexic, and terribly clumsy, led by the time I was 10 to being unable to tolerate the bullying that I experienced to such an extent. I mean, I was I was so so bullied about being ungraceful that I went crying to my father, and I said, "Daddy, I mean, they have to, I don't think anyone knows my name is Lisa. They just call me Klutz. I can't, it makes me more clumsy, and I know I'm clumsy, but I can't." And so he held a family meeting, and he informed the other four children they were not allowed to call me a klutz anymore, and they had to call me by my name, and they had to protect me from the neighborhood kids and the school kids who had taken up that cruelty. And so when I lead with this to say that literally the concept of being a graceful person on the level of physical form and motion, grace as a perception or an expression or a quality, a desirable quality of physical form and motion. And I recall really from my earliest memories this yearning, or actually it's maybe just because I was 4 when my little sister was born and I was no longer the baby, that I started really acting out dramatically. 2 weeks into being 5 years old, it was Halloween for kindergarten, and I kind of delayed, kind of like played hooky and was late to school just so I could make a dramatic entrance in my fantastic witch outfit. And I remember hiding in the bathroom and painting my nails red so I could make a dramatic entrance into, of course, my kindergarten teacher failed me. My mother did not listen to that, put me in first grade anyway, until I was suspended from first grade for being a redheaded terror. But what did happen in first grade was I was in a Catholic school in Miami Beach, where there was an amazing mother, Mrs. Fisher, who had a daughter in my grade and a daughter in fifth grade, a year ahead of my big sister. And Mrs. Fisher was a dancer. And I was in a Catholic school that was run by all the nuns who were called Mother. All the nuns were Mother. And there was only one priest in the parish. So it was a female dominated school. and parish. And the Mrs. Fisher created festivals for all the festivals. And I remember that first fall in first grade, um, seeing the festivals for all the holy days and the pageants that were created. And every year, the whole school was on a stage that had 1,000-seat auditorium. And that first grade experience under Mrs. Fisher's guidance really formulated in me the clarity that I was destined for the stage. And that that stayed with me when, before fifth grade, we were relocated to a school right outside of Washington, D.C. in Maryland, which was a male dominated parish, which had no um, feminine, it had no festivals, it had no festival celebrations, and it had no, um, it had sports, which I played, which was great, but uh, by the fall, I wrote, produced, and directed the Feast of the Annunciation for my class, and cast myself as Elizabeth because I'm Lisa, and I already knew I was a good character actor. And so I just couldn't not do it. And in sixth grade, I directed a production of A Christmas Carol, and I just made, for the rest of my life, opportunities for myself to perform. But I was driven by the spiritual, all my seeds of performance were in the spiritual act. And starting in sixth grade, I got more and more dissatisfied with the fact that no women were involved with any of the services. No women were allowed anywhere near the altar. There was some little altar off to the side to Mary. There was not even there wasn't a May procession. There wasn't anything for Mary at all. And so I began a campaign, and I spoke to the head, the principal, and then she connected me with one of the priests, and I spoke to him, and he said he'd take it to the Monsignor. And months went by, and and I went over their heads, and I went to the Monsignor directly, and I put my foot down, and I insisted that we have a May festival, and I got to create, in seventh grade, the first May festival and event for Mary um, that parish ever had. And so I could see that somehow I was really connecting to whatever the spiritual forces are in performance. And I thought, I was resentful that women weren't priests, and I knew I didn't want to be a nun. If I was going to be in the religious orders, I was going to be a priest. And and I didn't, so I had all these impulses very young. And fortunately, when I went to high school, I was in a brand new high school, and I got to really co-create the theater department, and had a wonderful time with the English teacher there, and produced and directed more shows and acted in more shows. My college life was seriously a disaster, and it was such a shift from having all these opportunities to create and produce. And there I was, a virtual entity in the theater department, and socially it was extremely traumatic. I was raped by a fraternity, and then my esteem was, and then they published an article telling everyone that I was it was a voluntary activity on my behalf. And they damaged my reputation so that even my sorority sisters wouldn't room with me or eat at the same table with me, and tried to get me kicked out. And ultimately I took up with an abusive alcoholic for 4 years. So these ages of essentially 19 to 24 were quite a trial for me. And my work in the theater department was non-existent. In 4 years at the major university, I played an extra on the main stage in one show for a total of less than 1 minute. And yet I continued to produce my own theater in the streets, in the quads. And I went into the avant-garde theater, because in that school, from the playful improvisational theater games of high school, they took us into the Stanislavski system of recalling your own personal pains. And I was not in a position at that stage in my life to be able to deal with the tragedies and the trauma that I was experiencing. And so if I tried to utilize the acting technique that they were suggesting, I would cry so much that I couldn't speak, I couldn't function. And so I went into the avant-garde using my love of athletics and everything. I became um, really skillful at stage combat and clowning and mime and mask work and puppetry, and did ventriloquism, and eventually wound up in New York as a founding member of an organization called the Bond Street Theater, which is still around today. We founded in 1976, traveling around the world, mostly in war-torn places, creating physical clown mime, stilt walking music, theater beyond words, teaching and educating people all over the world. They were in Afghanistan for 10 years. They were in the camps in Haiti. They were in Serbia and Croatia, and they've been in Myanmar and everywhere in the world, bringing incredibly healing theater. And that process of finding a very physical form of theater was exciting, because I didn't have to deal with the sense of my own trauma. But my own trauma led me to complete abandonment of faith. I just went total, no God would do this, and therefore there is no God. And I at one point became a professional stunt woman, and I couldn't do the theater company anymore. So I auditioned for a play which was looking for a mime actor, and I got the part. And it was there that I learned Michael Chekhov's acting technique. And in Michael Chekhov's acting technique, you see this chart that I have behind me, and this is an expansion of a chart that he personally drew for Mala Powers. I know Alice got to work with me and Mala. Mala's the greatest mentor of my life, and was the executor of Michael Chekhov's estate and the beautiful Roxanne, Jose Ferrar's Cyrano. And he drew a version of this just for her. And she shared it with me when we later in my life began teaching together. This state of inspiration that lives in the middle here is it's the state when there is a complete sense of grace. There is an absolute sense of effortlessness, and there is a sense of divided consciousness. There's a kind of super consciousness that is flowing through, and the artist, the performer, becomes the marionette, and the inspiration is the puppet master. And the artist simply allows that grace to flow through them and into the work of art, whether it's, you know, someone on Jeopardy or a basketball player or a pianist or a sculptor or um, you know, mathematician. It doesn't really matter. When you're in that state of grace, in that flow, um, there's this higher consciousness that is happening. And the body of, for the actor, the body is experiencing a very separate thing, because the body is expressing whatever the character's reality is, the screaming, raging, crying, laughing, loving, whatever that is, while the artist is apart from that, witnessing this astonishing moment that is happening. And while this force is streaming through. And when I found that with the Chekhov technique, it solved a massive problem that I had between my own personal reality, what Michael Chekhov calls the lower ego, and this higher sense of spirit, which I was by that time coming around to a knowingness that there was something. And this merging of my physical prowess, which the internal memory-based work did not engage the physiology. And I couldn't understand why an acting technique where you can only see the body would not train the physical form to transform, to change its form. And so I fell in love wildly with the Chekhov technique, because it merged everything about everything that I experienced as a child. Um, it came from it came from ritual. I have an absolute clear image of having done this in Egypt. There's no question for me. I did this in Egypt, and that's so when I did that play and I experienced it all, and I knew it was by far the best performing I'd ever done in my life. And um, one of the things that it allowed me to do was it allowed me to fall in love with my worst days of acting. So the artist always struggles, seems to always struggle with a self-critic. And that critic can be the most damaging and crippling thing to the artist in any way. And so getting the critic to accept with a feeling of grace whatever it is that comes out as perfect, as intended, as ideal for this time and this moment. Michael Chekhov has what he calls the four brothers of art, and these four brothers are beauty, ease, entirety, and form. And he has physical exercises to move the body with these four brothers, and meditative exercises to cultivate one's thinking forces, one's feeling forces, and one's will forces, to understand the nature of beauty and how it affects the physiology and how it affects the atmosphere, the vibration in the space, how it connects and unites the ensemble, and all of the incredible gifts that beauty gives us. And from the Institute of Heart Math, we see that when somebody spends 5 minutes in a state of appreciation, that their immune system gets a boost for over 6 hours. And that understanding really affirms for me the concept that through Michael Chekhov's work, healing is brought. A healing is really brought forward. And I found myself, as he takes us through exercises, one could say he looked at what kind of energy patterns were present when people are in peak flow. And he identified these consistent ones that are present and gave them names, and then created a means to awaken those concepts, to understand again in the thinking forces, in the feeling forces, and in the willing forces, and ways to really bring them into the physical form. The From the time we're born, we start limiting our expression, because we have to. We have to limit our expression so we can learn to sit up and roll over and stand up and become upright. All the possible things that we can be, we are really expressing, one little piece of it. Like Einstein thought he was at 8%, right? And the average human being closer to 5. The artist, who is an actor, in the ideal realm, would be able to express any of the potential of a human being through their physical form, and would not be limited by the habitual patterns that they've developed from birth or brought in with them. And so Mr. Chekhov's basic exercises, his psychophysical exercises, which are heavily influenced by eurythmy, include contracting and expanding, and moving with 4 elements of earth, water, air, and fire or light. And then gestures, which are archetypal in the will force, of the basic primal gestures that an infant does, even sometimes in the womb. They push, they pull, they gather, they throw, right? They lift, they smash. These things are taught, not taught, they're known by the human across cultures, and and done without really being taught. And if we can become fluid in moving our will force in all those ways, for example, and being able to move with the earth, water, air, light, degrees of resistance to any kind of motion, and can go through a full degree of expanding and contracting in our imagination, in our breath, in our voice, in the physical movement, and then be able to soften the physical expression, what he would call veiling, soften it by putting a veil, like a eurythmy veil, over it. If I have a bright light here and I didn't want it to shine quite so boldly, I could turn that light down by decreasing the amount of energy there. But instead, I could keep that light radiant, and I could put a veil between it and soften it without ever lowering the amount of radiant light that I'm sending. So this is Michael Chekhov's pathway to consciously connecting with the audience and with each other through these 4 brothers of beauty, ease, entirety, and form. And through that, I learned, especially the feeling of ease, that so much of my own clumsiness and klutziness was rushing, and was nervousness and failure to concentrate. And that if and unlike so many systems that, or people who tell you to relax, relax being it's a passive reaction, actually. It's a consequence of doing something. But we can ask you to move easily, and you can move easily. You don't have to relax to move easily. Mr. Chekhov said that to relax is an undoable command, but to move, we can breathe easily, we can move our bodies with ease. And I found it's completely fakeable. And with that, I was able to find a feeling of ease, beauty, grace with with all of my motions. And through the work, I was able to heal, and have been able to, and continue to work on healing a great deal of the traumas that came through, because I am able to fully embody and move in all the power and dynamic ways. it is my great gift to travel around the world and to work and mentor teachers and actors and artists from around the world in Michael Chekhov's technique. It's been my passion to reveal and fully express the spiritual content of Michael Chekhov's, which had been silenced, removed, disavowed in the practical teaching of it. And so uh, it's an interesting destiny to find myself working with bringing Michael Chekhov's work to the world in a way that will ultimately bring field of grace to the whole culture of training for entertainment. If we can train the writers and the producers and the directors to understand that entertainment is a spiritual mission and to bring a higher consciousness to it, we could, I mean, could you imagine if all of our entertainment was created with a higher level of consciousness? So it's not that we never show ugliness, and it's not that we don't show the evil and the dark forces, but that we can create through a field of love, through this Christ force. Michael Chekhov works with a power source in the center of the chest, like this sunlight, and gives us the image of a grail, that we ourselves, our body is the base of the grail. And when we engage in these Chekhov exercises, we build the stem of the grail. And when we prepare to draw these forces to us, we are the bowl part of the grail. We become an open vessel to receive what he describes as spiritual beings who want to be expressed through us. We form through his training ourselves into a grail cup, and we understand the character and the story exists in a sphere, and we welcome it to come down and play through us. And with that, we have grace. And when we play that way, the audience also is entrained with that same state of grace. And that is a healing act. So that's me.
Thank you, Lisa.
Wow.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you
Beautiful.
for that. Well, I'm going to step back a few paces and ask if anyone has questions for Lisa or comments arising out of her presentation. I know I certainly do, but I'll wait.
I had a wonderful experience Tuesday night at Sac State. There was a concert of Midori and Oscar Aiden. So violinist Midori, you probably know her,
Yeah.
and the pianist. And what was most, for me, most incredible and mesmerizing is how the two worked together, and there was a space between them that was a miracle. And then especially in the pauses during the music and the endings. So the end of the music, there was this incredible moment where you could see that they simultaneously they held on to the tune, the last tune, and then you could see how they miraculously let it go in a higher space. And that was you could see that also physically, how Midori in her arm that she had the how do you call it, the strike uh, on the violin, how she had the arm up and then let go. And your presentation really reminds me of this miracle. Thank you.
For me, Michael Chekhov's work is very heavily founded in music and identifying the powers in music. And in Chekhov's world, we look very much at those clear beginning, middle, and ends with this preparation that brings in these forces with the breath and fills the atmosphere with the moment before the moment starts and then sustains it.
Yeah.
And Michael Chekhov talks about the height of inner activity happens in the pause.
Yes, exactly. And it was tangible. It was just incredible. Really, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
And Midori also had her trauma. You know, she had anorexia and she had a very tough time in her life. So,
The wounded healer.
yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Lisa, could you share a little bit more of what is on that sun chart?
I will, first of all, the way Mr. Chekhov structured it, he said to Mala that each little box is like a light bulb. And all you need to do to turn the light bulb on in whatever box is to focus on it through concentration. And when you concentrate, you direct your strong concentration to a single box, it turns that light bulb on. And the moment that light bulb goes on, it shoots a spark of light that ignites the state of inspiration. The moment the state of inspiration is ignited, it shoots sparks out into all the other boxes and they all light up like a marquee instantly on their own effortlessly. So what the way I see what's in the boxes falls into areas where, for example, the psychophysical exercises that I mentioned, they prepare the artist in body, mind, and spirit to be able to receive any potential image. So if we were to say that the artist's task is to convey images to its audience, whether they're storyteller, painter, sculptor, doesn't matter what it is, actor, images conveyed to the audience. So if you're performing or you have the image and you go to perform it and it doesn't come out that way at all, it's like, oh, that's not what I meant. It just, oh, didn't come out right. That is a disconnection between the physiology, really, your body and the instrument that you are trying to convey with. It's not a failure of talent, so to say. It's not a failure of inspiration. It's a failure to convey the inspiration. So the first task is to be able to train the body to reveal the images. And then you want to be able to get really cool images. So there are many imagination exercises. So for characters, such as one of the first questions Michael Chekhov would ask Mala Powers would be, when he was privately coaching her, would be, is your character predominantly a thinking character, feeling character, or willing character? And how, most importantly, does your character's thinking force differ from your own? How does their feeling force differ from your own? How does their will force differ from your own? So not only what are they predominated by, but what is the distinction between yours and theirs? So the whole technique becomes, for example, a deep know thyself process. Same thing, we want to know our own expanding and contracting patterns, our own use of the earth, water, air, and fire. We want to know our own tendencies, whether we tend to push our way through the world or pull our way through the world or gather people. How do we operate? Because in the Chekhov technique, one of the unique things is we seek to play the differences. And in most other acting techniques, they ask you to find the similarities in the character and play those. And in contemporary terms, one could say, but that ain't broke, meaning what the way that I am the same as the character is already there. It's not a transformation. It's not creative. It's repetitive. It's exposing, but it's not creating. So other things, one of my real favorite, I mean, I love them all, but imaginary body is imagining the body of the character. And Mr. Chekhov loved to draw, and he would draw pictures. He would go into a meditation and go into this sphere of that he said, he describes it as surrounding outside the Earth's ozone layer, a sphere in which all the images live. And we can, through a meditative process, either travel up there and look around and communicate, or we can bring those images down and we can sit them in front of us. We can walk with them. We can talk with them. We can watch them and have them, invite them to show us who they are, completely independent of our own self. And then we try to imitate it. And that's that part where if you've done the basics, with these are like scales on a keyboard, right? Or vocal scales. If you can do all your scales well and jump back and forth between them, you should be able to sing anything or play anything. So once you can do all those scales, you see an imaginary body and you can say, oh, how expanded or contracted is that? Is it molding, flowing, flying, radiating? Does he tend to push or does she tend to lift more? Is she dominated by her thoughts? Does she lead with her center up in her head? Does she tend to walk in straight lines? Does she wear pinstripes? Or is she very feeling oriented and she wears more floral things and softer fabrics and moves in more curves? Or is she more will oriented, stronger jaw, use her thumbs more, sits back a little bit, leads with her pelvis, talks more with her guh and duh down here? What are the differences? So those are what we play. We have other items on here like tempo, rhythm, and composition. Help us make great decisions, because if our task is to convey great images to the audience, we have to generate them, and that's what some tools will do. But when we do that, we could have a gazillion different possible choices to make. So we need principles and guidelines to help make great decisions, laws of polarity, laws of inversion, things that as anthroposophists you may recognize appear. And what Chekhov has done is he's brought them into a way that can be used in a very, very practical way. So the whole technique can be taught without any of the underpinning spiritual laws, but it is for me just essential. Through Michael Chekhov's work, I obviously became a devout anthroposophist. From going from being an atheist to knowing. And when I first started in New York, I would, read and go to lectures and things, and I'd be like, oh, and this is way, I can't, and I move into LA, the heart of La La Land, New Age. and I am exposed to every kind of possible new age impulse. And I go to each one, I'm like, I think that's what Steiner meant. Oh, that's what Steiner. Oh, after a certain while, I went, oh, okay. I guess I need to go back to Steiner, because everything I see keeps reflecting back on, on a often more materialistic level, or a more, it went off to the east, off to the west, all these different possibilities. And ultimately, it really was through Michael Chekhov's work that I could see what my destiny was, and and it was and how my destiny was absolutely interwoven with the revealing the spiritual content of Chekhov's work.
Wonderful. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
When did Chekhov leave us? When was that?
Michael Chekhov lived 30 years after Rudolf Steiner. This is interesting to me. From 1891 to 1955.
55. Oh, okay.
Right. So yeah, same as James Dean, September 30th. Fred, you had something.
Yeah, Lisa, I think maybe you've already started to answer this question, but when, as an actor, you accept a role, what are the very first things you do from the time of picking up the script in order to build the character?
So Mr. Chekhov's work is really founded in Stanislavski's original work. And Stanislavski's original work, I studied extensively. Later, I researched the direct Russian materials and worked with Russians who were trained in the work, not the American versions. And I got a really good, clear system of analysis from them. And their system of analysis begins with what is known as the list of first impressions. So read the script, make a list of first impressions. What I've done is I've adapted that. I've done what I call Chekhovizing it, and I call this process synth analysis. So rather than analyzing, which is to cut, to synthesize the analysis, synth analysis. So I create a collage of first impressions. So I draw, I get out paper, depends. Sometimes I get my big chart and my chalks and stuff. Sometimes I'll just have a little teeny pad, depends on where I am when I'm reading it. But I just draw all the images that arise for me. And when I work with a cast, we do this as a whole group. We put up these big sheets and everybody gets and draws all their images. We wind up with 4 or 5 of these big sheets filled with images. And it's thrilling because you see in one read all these things that are living. And then ideally you read several more times. And the first times you're audience, what's coming to me as an audience. And then if I have the role, a specific role, then about my 4th or 5th read through, I will create a separate page and I will read through the lens of the character and start putting on the images from there. And from there, really looking at themes. What is this whole play about? And looking at what we call in Michael Chekhov's terms, the psychological gesture. It's a movement which, when done in one large movement, the duration of an inhale and an exhale, immediately snaps a person from the fully into the character's thinking, feeling, and willing forces and their imaginary body in one breath. And that there is a gesture for the play was living. It's a gesture that come ideally streamed down from that sphere of creativity into the author, into the script, through the director, and into the cast, and is living in there. And there might be a separate gesture for the author, for the director, but there's a reason this show must be done today. Like, why are we doing Macbeth still today? right? Um, why this show now for this audience? So I ask from there, what do I want my audience to do tomorrow for having seen my show today? Because it is for them. In what way will my work ennoble them and ennoble their lives? In what way can it help them move, help them heal, help uplift them, educate them, whatever it is, make them laugh, because that's what they need in the silliest nonsense material. Make them laugh, whatever it is. There's a higher purpose always for it. So yeah, from the images, move to the themes, create physical expressions of the themes, and then identify the sequence of atmospheres. So the atmosphere is the vibration in space, and every scene begins and ends in a different one. And so to find out, Mr. Chekhov called the atmosphere the soul of the story. And it's the single most absent element in storytelling today. In film, TV, live stage, you have spectacle. I think you guys may have talked about spectacle a bit. You wind up with spectacle, but the atmosphere, this is, what you're talking about with the violin, and how the space, you can see and feel the space, and these moments linger for a lifetime. You will never forget that moment. It lives in you. The soul permeates you. It uplifts you in some way, and that's the very, very essential understanding of how all of that flows.
Thank you.
That's great. Clearly, we have more to talk about, so you must come back. We'll talk about that offline later, maybe. The heart is the key to the world and to life. One lives in this helpless situation in order to love and to learn of one's dependency on others. Through imperfection, one becomes open to the influence of others, and this openness is just the point. In sickness, others can and should help us. So, Christ, from this standpoint, is the key to the world.